Welcome to your Money Map, sponsored by the Alliance for Lifetime Income. I'm your host, Jean Chatzky, coming to you today, actually not from where I usually come from on the East Coast. I'm in sunny, beautiful, balmy Tucson, Arizona. So very glad to be here with all of you. And no matter where you're watching from, let us know you're out there. Send us a note in the comments. We, of course, always welcome your input in these conversations. We are looking forward to your questions. So feel free to weigh in. And I'm sure that you'll have a bunch of them because we're digging into a topic that is going to hit an awful lot of us. 2024 is the year that our country will reach peak 65. That is the moment when more Americans than any other will turn the traditional retirement age, 65, than ever before. 12,000 Americans a day. It represents a very big demographic moment in our history. And the fact that our population is getting older means it's even more crucial for us to plan ahead, to focus on perhaps retirement, but maybe just what's next. And to that end, I have an incredible guest with me today. Joanne Lipman is the best-selling author of Next, The Power of Reinvention and in Life and Work. She's also the author of the #1 bestseller, That's What She Said. She is a pioneering journalist. She's been the editor-in-chief of USA Today, Condé Nast Portfolio, the Wall Street Journal's Weekend Journal, which is still my favorite newspaper of the week, and has led all of those organizations to a combined 6 Pulitzer Prizes. Joanne, welcome to your Money Map. Thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you, Jean. I love being with you. Happy to be here.
Tell me why this book, why now?
Sure. So what Next is, for those who aren't yet familiar with it, it is Next, The Power of Reinvention in Life and Work is a deeply reported guide to navigating change in how we live, how we work, how we lead. And it's backed by hundreds of interviews that I did, mostly during that 3 years of the pandemic, with people who have gone through extraordinary changes, whether we're talking in their careers, in their lives, or coming back from failure or from trauma, along with the experts who study the process of change, like everybody from neuroscientists who study aha moments to management gurus who study career change. And the reason why now is it is literally for this moment in time, because in the wake of the pandemic, so many of us are really feeling unmoored. I mean, it's really interesting these past few years, thankfully that immediate health crisis has receded, but this search for the new normal that we've all had, it seems more urgent than ever. We're rethinking our lives, reprioritizing, and we are really, really rethinking our relationships to our jobs and to the way that we want to work. And we needed a guidebook, and there wasn't one. And I had this sort of aha moment myself 3 years ago, early on in the pandemic, saying we need this guidebook, and it doesn't exist, so I want to write one. So I dove into the research right then and there.
I like your description of it as a guidebook because it's very process oriented, right? There are a lot of books. There's a lot of information out there that just gives us facts, a lot of data, but you take us through a process of reinvention. And I'd love to know how you came to define the process and its steps.
Sure. So I call this the reinvention roadmap, and it's 4 steps. I came up with it, by the way, exactly as you're saying. I did all these interviews with people who went through different kinds of change, talked to all the experts, asked all of them to walk me through the process. And then I sort of mapped it out for myself. And what I realized was they were all using different language, different terminology, but they were all describing the same set of steps. So I'll walk you through it super quick, and then we can dive in wherever you like. The reinvention roadmap, 4 steps: search, struggle, stop, solution. So the search, this first step, is where you're sort of collecting information, collecting experiences that are ultimately going to lead you to that transition. The cool thing about that first step is very often it is unintentional. You don't even realize that you're doing it, and it's going to lead you somewhere where you don't even expect you're going. That second stage is the struggle. Okay, so this is the tough one. It's where you start to disconnect from your previous identity, but you have not quite figured out the new one yet. And honestly, it's kind of miserable. We don't like to talk about it, and as a result, we don't talk about it. And if you think about sort of all of the transition reinvention stories we tell ourselves, I call it the Cinderella myth, right? It's like it happens overnight. It should happen, immediately. It's Cinderella, it's Spider-Man, Superman, it's American Idol, it's Who Wants to Marry a Millionaire, right? And but what that does is, because we leave out this middle struggle part in the stories we tell, which means that when it happens to us, and it happens to all of us, and when it does, it's very lonely. And also, it feels like there's something wrong with us. We think it's our problem. Everybody else is on that glide path to success, and only we are struggling. So the thing with the struggle is it very often doesn't end till you reach that third step, which is the stop. So the stop is the thing that pulls you out of your daily routine. Now, could be something that you choose, like I quit my job. It could be something that is imposed on you, like I lost my job, or there's a pandemic and we are all of our lives are upended. But what it does is, by pulling you out of your routine and out of your normal thought process, that is actually what allows you to then sort of synthesize the struggle, synthesize the experiences, all the things that you've accumulated, and it allows that to sort of coalesce into your understanding of what actually comes next. And that is the final step that then leads you to the solution, which is whatever you are transitioning to.
So as we look at this process, I'd love to just unpack some of these steps a little bit more.
Sure.
Starting with sort of the beginning of the search. How do we know when we're ready for this process of reinvention? On this show, we talk to people sort of in their pre-retirement years, mostly people sort of 45-ish and up. And sometimes it's a feeling, sometimes it's a financial need, sometimes it's a health crisis that hits where you think, well, I can't really do what I'm doing right now anymore, so I'm going to look for something else. The people that you spoke to, what characterized them in terms of launching them on this search?
So very often with the search, this is interesting. People were further along than they realized in this stage. So, for example, one of the favorite people who I met along the way is a guy named Chris Donovan, who was a telephone repairman for decades. Working class guy from Boston. Like, that's what you do. You get a job. He gets a job in high school. He keeps the job, but he had this hobby of drawing shoes. Like, he had this amazing imagination, and he just loved to draw like his inventions, which was a secret hobby because he was a telephone repairman, and like, it's not what you do, and it was not what you do in his families, but ultimately it turned out so after several decades, his future husband, he finally showed his drawings to someone, and his husband said to him, you have like serious talent. And he was in a struggle because, like, what do I do? Like, I love doing this, but that's not a career, and I need a job. But ultimately, he actually had a stop moment where he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And he said, you know what, life is too short. He was 50 years old by this point. But he said, I was put on this earth to design shoes. And when he recovered, which luckily he did, he took early retirement. His husband, they'd been scraping and saving to renovate the kitchen. His husband said, take the money, go back to school. And he did. And he is now a shoe designer. And so it's amazing. It's Chris Donovan shoes. You can find them online. He's fantastic. But in his search phase, to go back to your question there, he spent years drawing these shoes. He was actually learning all along the way. It's just something he never realized was going to take him there. And I found that was very, very similar, even for people who had very extreme pivots like his. I mean, there was another guy who I love who spent 30 years as a JP Morgan, Harvard-trained economist in Manhattan and London. and now today is a Hudson Valley beef cattle farmer. And I'm like, how in the world do you go from one to the other? And it turns out, he had years ago bought a weekend house for his family, looking for an inexpensive place. He gets this old farmhouse. But he got drawn in on weekends over many years into farming. So he learned little by little. And as he said, it's not like I set out to say, in my retirement, I think I'll be a cattle farmer. Like he said, that would be quite foolish. But it was that he was searching all along without even realizing it. So I do think that a lot of people do that, but there are also strategies that we can talk about. I have a dozen strategies in Next that I call in the back of the book, and we can talk about a few of them, because if you are in that period of time, like, should I start? There are things that you can do.
For example, one of the things that I know that you tell people to do if they're wondering either should I start or where should I go, is to get some outside impression, some outside counsel.
Yes. Okay. So you've hit on, I think this may be my favorite of all 12 strategies. I love this so much. I call it the expert companion. So I'm borrowing this phrase, by the way, from trauma psychologists. They developed this idea that if you've been through a trauma, they're trying to encourage post-traumatic growth, not just post-traumatic stress. And to do that, there needs to be someone who you can tell your story to, who can help you sort of get a view of yourself, a more realistic view. I think we all need an expert companion, and that is a person who knows you and can reflect back to you what are your strengths and what are your talents. The reason is we are kind of bad at understanding ourselves sometimes when it comes to our innate strengths, innate talents. We all have them, but because they come naturally to us, we either discount them like, oh, everybody can do that, or we don't even recognize them. So your expert companion could be a coach, like a career coach, but it could also just be a friend, a colleague, a relative, who reflects back to you sort of what they see in you. What do they see are your strengths and your talents? And what that does is it can help you to focus. It gives you a much more realistic sense of who you are and where you might go with it.
Importantly, these people you write are not there to give you advice. And I
Thank
think
you.
that's a big distinction.
Thank you for mentioning that, Jean. I should have said that right up front. These are people who are reflecting back to you your strengths, your talents, but they're not telling you what to do. The idea is what this conversation does with your expert companion is it helps you to get a better sense of who you are and what your strengths are and what your interests are. One of the examples I actually use is my own husband, who I was at the Wall Street Journal for many, many, many years, and very happy there and had no intention of leaving. And then I was approached by Cy Newhouse, who's sadly no longer with us, who owned Condé Nast, which owns, Vogue, Vanity Fair, Glamour, The New Yorker. Anyway, they approached me about starting a new business magazine, and it was very tempting, but I was very reluctant to leave. And I was literally paralyzed for several months. And it was my husband who reflected back, did not give me advice, but my husband said to me, when you talk about this mythical magazine that doesn't exist, he said, I see your affect changes. Like, I see your face lighting up. I see this excitement in you. And it was revelatory to me, because I didn't even realize that sort of how I was interpreting acting. And it really helped me to make that choice to take the leap and start that magazine.
Maybe our husbands should be our expert companions, because mine has done the same thing for me. I did money makeovers for years for Oprah and the Today Show. And my husband said, you love that. Like, when you are helping real people with their real money, that's what you like. And now we're doing financial coaching at Her Money as a result of having that conversation, because he told me that I like that.
Right.
So I think that's true. I think that's
Yeah.
true. The struggle is a very interesting step, because we don't talk about it. But one of your 12 strategies is actually to use all of the struggles that we've had along the way to provide us with data about things that we're good at. Can you explain how that works?
Sure, sure. So first of all, that struggle is so important. All the work is getting done there. One thing people do need to realize during that struggle phase is we all go through it, but also that's the time when you feel like you're stuck and you're standing still. But in fact, all of my research shows that you're actually moving forward. You're making a lot of progress. You just don't feel it. So if you're out there right now struggling, know that it's okay. It's actually part of the normal process. There's nothing wrong with you. But in terms of the data, this is fascinating. There's a strategy that is to create your own CV of failure. So a CV of failure is, instead of all your great successes and all your great jobs, you write down every time you flamed out. It's like the job you lost, the professor who told you you were useless, the fellowship you applied for and didn't get, the employer who ghosted you, you name it. Put it all down there. And it may seem counterintuitive, but I met a scientist. She's the first person who did this. Melanie Stefan is the first person, I believe, who did this. And she did it because she has this absolutely gold-plated resume of, Ivy League, everything, Cambridge, Oxford, etc. And she's brilliant. But she went through so much pain, and she did her own CV of failure at one point after she'd been turned down for like 15 fellowships. And then she published it. And the response she got was overwhelming, because people are like, thank you for acknowledging that we all go through this. But she said it did two things. The first thing it did is it shows you what you've tried, which that alone can be really helpful and encouraging. But perhaps more importantly, it's actually data. It's useful data. In her case, she started as a biologist, and she found in her CV of failure, all of her failures were centered in a lab where she had to manipulate things with her hands, like, working with fish, right? Whereas what she realized, it made her realize that her strengths were elsewhere. Her strengths were with computational biology. And it made her switch her focus to the area, and it made her realize that this is where my strength is. She switched her focus and has had great success since. So it's great data.
I think that many of us have these, and maybe it's many of us women, but have these radios that play negative thoughts in our head. And sometimes using the collection of actual data can help us fight back against those things as well.
Oh, that's so true. That is so true. That's another thing an expert companion does, by the way, is reflects back to you. There's something else that you can do that is also really helpful. Another one of these strategies is to share your, once you have a goal, right, to share it with someone else, and particularly to share it in writing. There's all kinds of research that shows that when you do share a particular goal in writing with someone else, you are far more likely to achieve it. Whether or not they're even giving you advice or responding back, it helps to make it real, right? So I think all of these things really come down to sort of taking action. Don't just like cogitate in your own head and get lost in the spiraling thoughts.
You actually have to do something. Sometimes when it comes to the doing of something, whatever it is, we don't want to listen to our gut instincts. We don't want to trust our intuition. And you actually took a really deep dive into the fact that intuition is not some, woo woo thing. It's actually real. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. I have a whole chapter on basically, should you trust your gut? And the short answer is yes, you actually should. Not always, I have to say, it's not always right. But the reason why your gut very often feels correct, and most often is correct, is because actually gut feeling is generally based on knowledge and experience. And gut feeling is actually a form of pattern recognition. So the reason it feels correct is whether you consciously realize it or not, you have collected enough information that your body is reacting before your brain can catch up. So like a really great example, an easy example of that would be if you think about those chess masters who can play 3-dimensional chess, or they can play 25 games at once, and they can do it. It looks like they're not thinking. They go boom, 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 boom. And the reason is that is their gut. They have had so many chess moves accumulated inside that they their body catches up. Their body knows what to do before their brain can even catch up with it. And that is something that is the scientific reason why gut is correct. Another thing that is often correct are your aha moments. And I have a separate chapter on the neuroscience of aha moments, which are also generally correct because, again, your aha moments come from knowledge that you already have inside your head. The cool thing about aha moments is what aha moments actually do. Is when we are consciously thinking. This is why if you're focusing on a problem, sometimes you can't get to the solution, whatever that problem is, and it's driving you crazy, and you focus and focus and stare, and you can't get there. And then you walk away to get a drink of water, or you go to sleep, or you go for a run, and boom, like there's the answer. In the middle, you're in the shower, you get the answer. The reason is that what the aha moment is you have to actually turn off the executive function of your brain. So we have this executive function thing that keeps us in our lane and corrals our thoughts. And what that does is it basically silos off your thoughts, keeps it focused. Well, when you turn that off, all of these unconnected, disconnected thoughts can swim around, and then they can swim into something totally new. So your brain is sort of working behind your back, but your executive function must be turned off. And that's why when it swims behind your back, it coalesces, it comes up with this idea, and then it surfaces like this great aha moment. But which, by the way, is one of the reasons why it is so important for all of us to actually take breaks during the day. Yeah. Take your weekends, take your vacations. Like, there was wonderful research that was done. These scientists chose a group of writers and a group of physicists, and they wanted to figure out left brain and right brain people and how the brains work. And they had them keep a diary of sort of when they had their best ideas of the day. And then they looked at the diaries to see when these things happened. And it turns out that their best ideas were not during their workday. Their best ideas were when they stepped away, and not necessarily doing anything fun either. Like somebody said, I was vacuuming, or I was
doing something you don't have to think, right?
Right.
Yeah. Your brain is a little bit freer. I can totally relate. I feel like I've had my best ideas either when I'm on a run, as you said, or when I'm in the shower, strangely. Although at one point, the woman who did the herbal essences commercial told me that actually hot water pounding on your head also helps you think. So go figure.
Oh, okay. I learned
there
something.
So let's say you go through these steps, right? We go through the process. We search, we struggle, we come up with some things that we think maybe we would like to try, that might be a reinvention for us. We're at this very precarious moment financially. We're not sure if the country's going into recession. We know people's savings rates are falling. Credit card debt is rising. We're not saving enough for retirement. How do you approach making this change and still keeping your financial life on the rails?
That's a really great point, Jean. So the first thing is, don't quit your day job just because you have this other idea. Like, don't say, I'm quitting my secure job because tomorrow I want to be an astronaut, right? Like, doesn't work that way. And many of the people I interviewed, they stayed in secure jobs like the telephone repairman, for a number of years to have that financial security. But what you can do while you are in keeping your financial security is to what I call move before you move, which is to take a course, to shadow someone, do the informational interview, do your research, right? So that you can then move into it. I just met a guy who he was a lawyer, child of immigrants. Like, you have to get a good job. Your parents struggled and saved to get you here. He gets his law degree, and he really wanted to go into comedy and into entertainment. And so what he did was, he was a lawyer for that financial security, but during that time, he scrimped and he saved while doing comedy at, open mic nights, that kind of thing. And ultimately was able to make that transition by having the financial security, but moving in advance of actually quitting the law and moving into entertainment. And that I find is true for many people.
I know that you spoke to people sort of all along the age spectrum, people in their 30s, people in their 60s. Did you find any sort of uh, trends or differences when people were looking to make these changes to find their next? Was a degree of financial security in the pic, like something that they focused on? Did they get outside help to make sure that they could make these transitions? I mean, this occurs to me that if you're thinking about something like this, it might be a really good time to talk to a financial advisor.
Oh, yeah. Look, I mean, every person I talk to find financial soundness played in, whether, even for people who you would think, oh, they're really well off, they could actually quit their job tomorrow, had the same financial concerns that you're talking about, as did the 20 somethings I talked about who were pivoting. And I think, we all have to have a degree of responsibility. And there is, when you want to make a pivot, there's a certain degree of privilege involved, whether or not, and like I said, I spoke to people from all socioeconomic backgrounds and age groups from the 20s to the 90s. And so there were a certain key things that all of these groups shared across the age groups. And this idea of like the financial security of not leaping without a net, all of those things played a very, very important role, right? You want to do this in a reasonable way. This is why I wanted to come up with this reinvention roadmap, by the way, is to help people guide their way through it so that they can understand, it's not instant. But it's also, don't quit just because it's difficult, right? That's the whole message of this struggle idea. The other thing I want to mention that is really important is to have a very open mind about where you might be going. And a lot of the people who I spoke to, they ended up in places very far off from where they thought they would be. The economist never thought he'd be a cattle farmer, for example. But there were so many examples like that. And along the way, what they did is they redefined what success was. And there was a guy who I met, a younger man who had, again, child of immigrants, had to like get that degree, had to go to the Ivy League school, had to be a managing director, and he got it all. He did it all. And he got there and he's like, this is like not fulfilling. What he really loved was his family. He loved surfing. And he ended up, again, he stayed in that job long enough to get the financial security he needed. He worked with a coach to make sure that he had saved enough that he could take a little bit of a flyer, and ultimately remade his life. He said, he's a coach for others. He puts out a newsletter for other millennial men like himself. He surfs every single day, and he takes his children to school every day and has dinner with them every night. And he said his definition of success, he said, I make less money, but I make enough to have the life that I want. And that is success. And so I think that's a huge piece of this, is you want to understand your finances, but you also want to understand what is your true definition of success.
It's interesting when you describe that. We tend to think of women setting goals and building their finances around those goals, that having enough to be able to accomplish their goals is actually the end game. And often for men, we think it's different. We think that the goal is just more. The goal is just accumulate. It's a little bit more of a game. What is intriguing about your book is how much it's appealing to men as well as women, how much they're seeing themselves in it. Can you talk about what you've heard?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. That this is something men and women, I think we're all, I do think has something to do with the pandemic and the fact that so many of us had our lives upended. People in knowledge industries like us were all sent home. But it also made you realize there's another way to live and to work. And that is something that both men and women can really, really relate to. And it also did give us a perspective on what is success. Is success just more and more and more? And the other thing it did, and again, I talk about how important it is to have this open mind. But I think about sort of all the things that we were brought up on. I mean, I spent all those years at the Wall Street Journal, you're a financial journalist. We were brought up on those things like that Think and Grow Rich idea, that book, right? The seminal idea, which is have a goal, work backwards, have every single step of the way planned out to get to that goal. And what I found, and I think this is especially true now, is that that's not the case anymore. So many people who I spoke with may have started out with that goal, but along the way, they were open-minded enough to realize that their experience, interests, talents were taking them somewhere else. And it is so important to keep that open mind, because you may end up somewhere unexpected, but virtually all of them said it ended up in a place that was far more fulfilling.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I have watched my stepdaughter and her boyfriend, who've spent a year, he's 40, she's in her 30s, as digital nomads. They kept their job, they traveled the world. And one of the things that they learned about themselves was that they like living in nature. And so that when they come back, at which they're doing soon, and we're happy about that, although their plans had been to come back and go to New York City, I don't think that's happening, because this year, this experimentation, this learning about themselves allowed them to redefine what they want, which is kind of amazing. And as we talk about people who are heading into that next phase of life, whether we call it retirement or whether we call it something else, one of my big fears has always been, if I'm not doing this, who am I? But in fact, I think your work is teaching us that I could be a lot of different people.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And I think that what we're finding, and certainly what I found in all these interviews with these people, is that we do tend to conflate our identity with our job title. But now what I'm seeing is that the skills that we have, no matter what field you are in, these skills are really transferable. And in the world we live in, and particularly this increasingly digital world, there are so many different ways where you can take your talents. And so your identity is you. And I agree with you. I do think retirement is different. I mean, we're in the same generation, and I don't know anybody my age or older who is thinking of the traditional retirement. They're thinking about maybe easing into some other kind of role, or pursuing a passion, or even going back to school. But it's not our parents' generation, where it's like you get up, in your 60s, you hit maybe 65, you're done, you get your gold watch, and you go to Florida and you sit on the porch or play shuffleboard. Like, that doesn't, maybe that exists for some people, but I think increasingly it doesn't, and it certainly will not be the case for young people coming into the workforce now, who are really looking, as opposed to when we started, the idea was a 40-year career path to retirement. They're really looking at more of a 60-year kind of career path that's going to give them lots of room to reinvent and reinvent again over the course of their careers.
Well, the book is fabulous, and the people who are watching are certainly getting that. We've heard from Holly and Jordana that they are ordering the book right now. Joanne, where would you send them to learn more about you, to order the book? I think we put a link in your link tree is in the comments. So if you want to find that, is there anywhere else people should go?
Sure. So you can buy Next anywhere where you buy books, Amazon, obviously, anywhere you order books. If you have a local independent bookstore, we love supporting them. Yes. And my website is joannelipman.com, all one word, joannelipman.com. And you can find me there, and you can contact me there and continue the conversation.
And for more from the Alliance for Lifetime Income, if you need to have one of those conversations with a financial advisor and you're looking for a list of great questions to ask that advisor when you're choosing one, go to our website. It's protectedincome.org. And for more information on this conversation, specifically protectedincome.org/Lipman. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Joanne.
Thanks, Jane. Great to see you.
Bye.